Well, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has been clear about his stance on COVID lockdowns, the culture wars, immigration, but the potential 2024 presidential candidate has been quiet on foreign policy until now.
On Monday night, Fox News host Tucker Carlson aired responses to a questionnaire he sent to DeSantis seeking clarification on his foreign policy position, specifically the war in Ukraine. Carlson read key parts of the response. Let's watch.
DeSantis is adamantly opposed to the position that most Republicans in Washington have taken on Ukraine. DeSantis is not a neocon. Who knew? Quote, while the U.S. has many vital national interests, DeSantis writes, securing our borders, addressing the crisis of readiness within our military, achieving energy security and independence, and checking the economic, cultural, and military power of the Chinese Communist Party, becoming further entangled in a territorial dispute between Ukraine and Russia is not one of them. Without question, he writes, peace should be the objective. The U.S. should not provide assistance that could require the deployment of American troops or enable Ukraine to engage in offensive operations beyond its borders. F-16s and long-range missiles should therefore be off the table. These moves would risk explicitly drawing the United States into the conflict and drawing us closer to a hot war between the world's two largest nuclear powers. That risk is unacceptable.
DeSantis goes on to write that President Biden's actions with regard to Ukraine have led to an alliance between Russia and China. You know, this is interesting on many levels. One, I do think it's a foreign policy track that aligns most closely with what the American people have advocated for in poll after poll, and which, if the contest ends up being between DeSantis and Trump and Biden as kind of the big players in this whole thing, makes a very neat line for DeSantis, especially even in the context of a general election matchup. There are a good number of independents and even some Democrats for whom this foreign policy angle is going to be dispositive.
Yeah, he's drawing a real contrast with obviously what the Biden administration has actually done, which is said there is no amount of support that is too limited. We are going to support them as long as it takes, as much as it takes. Kind of a blank check attitude. That is what Biden has signaled. I don't think that's quite where the mood of the population at large is. Obviously, there are some Democratic representatives who tentatively tried to flirt with a different position and were forced to backtrack. But Republican voters clearly want something along the lines of what DeSantis articulated there. Nowhere in that statement did he say that Russia is justified or correct or deserves to win this war. But he said something that is very realistic, which is that we cannot be drawn into World War III over a Ukrainian territorial dispute, and peace must be the objective. Peace above all else. Not preserving Ukraine's exact autonomy as it is now, but peace. So whatever brings a swift end to this conflict is what we should do. Is pledging to arm the Ukrainian resistance until the end of time going to bring a swift, immediate end to this conflict? The answer obviously is no. That's something DeSantis sounds like he understands.
Yeah, now some people have pointed out that this hasn't always been DeSantis's position. In 2015, when, of course, Obama was president and the conflict first started to emerge with Crimea, he wrote, "We in Congress have been urging the president, I've been to provide aid, arms rather, to Ukraine. They want to fight their good fight. They're not asking us to fight it for them." Now, obviously, this is a somewhat different circumstance, and that doesn't necessarily conflict with the idea of not wanting to send long-range missiles and things that could instigate a conflict between the U.S. and Russia. But it does raise the question whether or not this is political expedience versus a kind of sincere policy position that you could count on if he were to be president of the United States.
Well, look, I don't know what is in his heart with respect to foreign policy. I think it's clearly the case that 10 years ago he would have been more a standard. But 10 years ago, the Republican Party position on foreign policy was not so clearly anti-interventionist. The fact that he's moved in the direction of what Republican voters actually want, I think, is a good sign. Is it what he has sincerely always advocated all along? Obviously not. There's no way he can pretend that it is. But reflecting what the base wants, what the American people want on this is a pretty good impulse. Obviously, I wish he'd had a kind of Ron Paul style foreign policy views since the beginning of time. But barring that, this seems like the next best thing, which is to actually adapt to the views that the voters have, and that I think are actually the correct views.
Yeah, I mean, I see some more people here pointing out comments that he made in 2018. More recently, Michael Tracy, who has been very critical of escalation with Russia and who has been very much on, the anti-war side of things, is also skeptical of Ron DeSantis because he participated in this framing that was very common among Republicans that Barack Obama was weak on Russia because he didn't want to escalate and engage in this way, and that Donald Trump was strong on Russia because he did. And they were advocating for sending more lethal aid to Ukraine and things like that. So again, we have seen this with Joe Biden. Promise after promise being made in the context of a presidential run and a primary and then a general election run that are reneged upon the second you're in office. And this is a pretty significant issue to hypothetically potentially renege on, especially when you have someone like Donald Trump, who again has had some mixed statements on these kinds of things, but has generally been since day one very anti-interventionist. And the question is, in a contest between those two, who's going to come out as the one true Scotsman of anti-interventionism? Yeah,
I think that's the more interesting matchup here because, there's little doubt that the DeSantis view of this and the Biden view are very. Biden is actually governing. He's actually doing the things, and DeSantis says he doesn't want to do those things. Do voters trust Trump more on foreign policy than DeSantis, Republican primary voters? Yeah. That is a question we're going to have to explore. Obviously, I think being a bit more being non-interventionist is one of Trump's more sincerely held beliefs. It's something he said at times where before the media knew it was popular. Before the media had caught on, before Republican leaders, officials had caught on to the idea that no one in the party, that none of the rank and file actually support adventurism, before they had realized that, Trump had realized it. And I think it was in part because it was his natural inclination on Iraq and Afghanistan and some other things. Now, did he govern in accordance with those views? I would say his foreign policy approach was very schizophrenic. He would say things that made sense about not, being the world police and, why can't Europe pay for its own defense and all those kinds of things. At the same time, he, put John Bolton, one of the foremost advocates of war with Iran and North Korea, in a key foreign policy position. His personnel decisions certainly weren't based on a coherent, non-interventionist foreign policy approach. So this is going to be interesting to put DeSantis, maybe a newer convert to the non-interventionist right-leaning tendency, up against Trump, who did talk the talk, but maybe didn't quite walk the walk. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, so the other last angle on this, I think, is the Tucker Carlson angle. Remember, there's been this ongoing story about these messages and emails that came out in the context of this Dominion lawsuit, which really demonstrate a significant level of animosity by Tucker Carlson toward Donald Trump, and a frustration that Tucker keeps expressing that he has to kind of performatively be for Trump on the airwaves despite not supporting him behind the scenes. So the headline, "I hate Trump passionately," has been everywhere. That's a Tucker Carlson quote. He also said, "We're all pretending we've got a lot to show for the last 4 years because admitting what a disaster it's been is too tough to digest, but come on, there isn't really an upside to Trump." So is part of the request that's put out to DeSantis and then reading these sentiments that Tucker knows, because he's very politically savvy, are going to play well with his audience. Another part of him trying to hold on to Trumpism but distance himself from Trump and set DeSantis up as the heir apparent. Yeah,
I think it's just transparently obvious that this was good for DeSantis, that the things he's saying about Ukraine are popular with Fox's audience, just as they are generally in the Republican base. So, letting viewers know that this is how DeSantis feels about it, given that this is how DeSantis feels about it, definitely a good thing for him. And you could absolutely understand how someone, Tucker's an opinion host, he's allowed to have opinions. His opinion might very well be that Ron DeSantis is the stronger Republican nominee. That's my opinion, too. And also that his ability to kind of play two sides on the Trump thing and have a private position and a public position has been undermined by this Dominion lawsuit. So to the extent that he might have wanted to continue to be on the Trump train, I'm sure that this has soured his relationship with Trump. I don't know what kind of friendly interviews Trump is going to be giving on Tucker Carlson's show going forward. And maybe it's kind of forced Tucker Carlson to switch forces. Trump put people on the right in the position of having to defend really difficult and indefensible things, and nobody wants to go through that again. So it's not a surprise that DeSantis is, to the extent he's the preferred candidate, and also seems likely to be the actual more electable of the two in a general election.
But we'll see.
Maybe. More Rising right after this.